No decent person knowingly supports child trafficking. Pizzagate and the uproar about the 2020 Super Bowl halftime show demonstrate just how fired up people can get about the topic, even if that passion is misplaced. But what if the biggest child trafficking criminal was also one of the world's most popular websites? My next guest has a master's degree in public diplomacy and interned in DC with the United Nations University Millennium Project, where she added the issue of human trafficking to their annual State of the Future report. Having inherited her immigrant father's connection to the plight of the oppressed, she has been studying and combating the crimes of human trafficking since the early 2000s. In 2014, she began to take a closer look at the porn industry's ties to sex trafficking. And in 2020, her advocacy work led her to Pornhub, which at the time was the fifth most visited website in the world and an unchecked cesspool of egregious child porn. Through her public awareness efforts and collaboration from some unlikely sources, Pornhub has since deleted 91% of its website content. Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and PayPal have all withdrawn their business from the site, and tens of thousands of victims are represented in individual and class action lawsuits against them. But her mission remains incomplete to shut down the website entirely. Today, she's going to get us caught up on what you may have missed as we ask the question: is everyone's favorite porn site victim of anti porn campaigners or an active crime scene run by executive megapimps? Justice seeker, defender of underdogs, fellow introvert, Lila Mickelwaite. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be able to chat with you and let your listeners hear about this problem.
Well, I think people might be surprised to know right off the bat that you are not actually like anti porn. Your plan and your goal is not to ban porn entirely. Why is that?
Well, I think it's an important distinction to make in this work. We have a very narrow focus with what we're doing, and we don't even call it going after pornography because it's really offensive to victims, actually, to call what happened to them porn, because porn is legal. Pornography would be consensual, it would be between adults. And what we're talking about and what I'm fighting is actually crime scenes, is sexual crime that was filmed globally distributed and monetized online, and that includes a spectrum of abuse from children who were raped all the way, to adults who were trafficked, to non-consensual content where it may have been consensually recorded but then it was non-consensually distributed. So the whole spectrum of abuse, but we're going after the crimes and not the legal porn industry.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. Well, I was really surprised because I had heard of Pornhub, but I didn't understand like how it worked. I didn't know that it was like the YouTube of porn, user generated
Mhm.
content that literally anyone could upload and just put out there for the world to see. You having studied sex crimes much longer than I have, obviously, you probably already knew that. But what did surprise you as you kind of went down that rabbit hole of Pornhub?
Well, I started to read some headlines late 2019 that really arrested my attention and made me want to investigate what was going on further. Particularly, there was a story of a 15-year-old girl from Florida, and she was missing for an entire year. And she was finally found when her distraught mother was tipped off by a Pornhub user that he had recognized her daughter on the site. And she was found in 58 videos being raped and trafficked for profit, and she was finally rescued from the abuser's apartment when the police were able to match the abuser's rapist's face from the videos to 7-Eleven surveillance footage, and they rescued her from the apartment. She had been impregnated, forced to have an abortion. It was just a horror story. And that was alongside some other really concerning headlines at the time. There was a mother named Nicole Adamando from New York, and she was tortured. She was raped by her partner, and she ended up killing him in self defense, but she got sentenced to life in prison and separated from her two young children. Sunday Times had done an investigation, and they released a report late 2019 that had found dozens of illegal videos on the site within minutes, even children as young as 3. And I was haunted by a question at the time of how in the world did these crime scenes get uploaded to the world's most popular porn site? That question gave me an idea, and I said, "Well, let me test the upload system for myself to see what it takes." And that's when I realized what millions of people already knew. And that was that all it took was an email address to upload. So this is the YouTube of porn. This is where anybody with an iPhone can become a pornographer, can film a sex act in a hotel, in a bedroom, in a car, wherever, upload it online. And they weren't verifying age to make sure that these are not children. So they wouldn't require an ID. They wouldn't require a consent form to make sure they're not rape or trafficking victims. And that's when everything made total sense. And I understood exactly how those victims had ended up on the site and realized that actually this site is infested with videos of sexual crime because of that process and many other things we discovered. And I said, okay, we have to sound the alarm on what's going on and call attention to this really huge problem.
How did they get around that? There's a US law, 2257, that requires that these sorts of videos have age verification, record keeping, there's labeling requirements. I know it's a Canadian company, but how do they get around having the website active in the US when we have those laws that are supposed to protect people?
That is the best question because they actually do have offices here. They distribute the content here. They have users here, and they were required to abide by USC 2257, especially because the law says if you transfer the content. So their defense was, well, we're not publishers of the content, we're not creators of the content because it's users who create it and they use our website to distribute it. Well, they're the ones monetizing it. This is free porn. The ones that are actually making the money on this content is Pornhub and its parent company. But they would say, okay, well, we didn't create it, so we're not responsible. But because they were transferring it, so they had a download button on every single video on the site that transferred that content from their servers onto the devices of millions of people around the world. And much of that was contraband. It was actually, a federal crime to transfer that content from a child pornography law perspective. But it was also illegal because they were supposed to be verifying age and consent if they were transferring that content. So they were actually breaking multiple laws by not doing this.
I think that brings up a good point about you can download it and therefore you can redistribute it because I think for folks that didn't grow up with the internet or maybe like me, we grew up half and half. And so like the internet is still YouTube is still Charlie bit my finger, like those cute videos, we have an overly naive outlook on what it means to have a video you don't like being posted on the internet. And so that's the spirit I'm asking this question from is if someone's like, well, okay, there's all these victims out there. This happened when they were children. Now they're adults. They should just move on. Like, what's the big deal? Help us understand and get caught up on the difference between a poster being put up in a town square versus a digital depiction of ourselves on the internet.
Such a great question again. I mean, I think it starts off with the internet's forever and people understanding what happens when a video or an image gets uploaded online on one of these sites where it's not just that they can download it because they took the download button off, thankfully, after a lot of pressure, but people screen record it easily. There's many different ways that people can possess that content once it's online. And what happens to these victims, they actually call it the immortalization of their trauma because it's a horrific thing to experience a rape, an assault, abuse. But then when it's filmed and then it's globally distributed for profit and pleasure, downloaded, and then what happens, it gets re-uploaded again and again. And even if they beg to get these videos down, I mean, I've seen the pleading emails. One of the victims that I talk about in the book, her name was Nicole, and she showed me the begging emails that she would send to Pornhub again and again saying, listen, I am a child. This is illegal content. Why are you letting this get uploaded again and again, even when I beg for it to come down? And like many others, she became suicidal. Many of the victims that I spoke with had already attempted suicide multiple times. The suicidal ideation rate for victims of this kind of abuse, whether they're adults or children, is near 50%.
Oh, wow.
And so, they get to a point as well where they get just completely debilitated, where because this is going out on the mainstream internet, like this is the surface web, this isn't the dark web where maybe a few people know how to get to that dark web and get that content. This is on Google search, where in some cases their name would be attached to the video, their school, their hometown. And so somebody types in their name, well, their abuse video would pop up on Google. And this would continue for years. And they imagine the fact that even if they get the video down, they're going to be playing what I call it's like a sadistic game of whack-a-mole for the rest of their life. And it's such a torment. Some of them can't even leave the house because they go to the grocery store and they're just in this kind of like paranoid situation where they're wondering who has seen my rape. And it's so debilitating. So, I mean, those are like some examples of why this trauma, why it's so much more than just an image that gets out some pixels on a screen. It's so damaging and traumatizing for victims.
I think we understand a company's motivation behind getting more content, even if the content is terrible, because more content means more opportunity for ads, which is more money. But what's the motivation behind the public who's not getting a profit share to keep uploading content like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because it's not in most cases for money. Only 20% of the content on Pornhub, the profit was going to the uploader. And really quick to zoom back, they had 56 million images and videos on the site at the height of the pandemic in 2020. They had enough content uploaded every year. It would take 169 years to watch if you put those videos back to back. They had, 170 million visits per day, 62 billion visits per year, fifth most trafficked website in the world, like you mentioned at the beginning. So you're right. They needed massive amounts of content in order to drive that kind of traffic to the site so they could sell 4.6 billion ad impressions on the site every single day. And that's how they made their money. So there was no incentive for them to take down content. But the incentive for those to upload it was the same reason that people upload to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. It's likes, views, clicks, comments, this, I guess you call it social currency, where people want to do that. They want to share. And in this case, they're not just sharing what they ate for lunch, they're sharing a crime scene and getting likes, getting millions of views in some cases. Like these victims would have millions of views. They had on the site in 2020, 11 million comments on the site. So that's why they were doing it.
I think it's hard for good people to believe that any company would, especially like, people in the company have kids. That's what's unbelievable. So it's hard for people to believe that they would be completely aware of what they're doing. And so some would argue, well, bad content is going to slip through the cracks. They can only moderate so much. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond with the facts that we uncovered through the course of, I would call it an investigation, but it wasn't really just an investigation. It was an uncovering in this very organic, grassroots sort of way where a petition that I started went viral. Today, we have 2.3 million signatures from every country in the world. And as that was going viral and thousands of media articles were being written, victims were coming forward on almost a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day, and whistleblowers from inside the company. So company insiders were coming forward. And what they were revealing, it was like these onion layers of deep complicity of the owners in the decisions that they were intentionally making to basically ensure that this kind of content would be uploaded again, and hard to remove, and that it would continue to be monetized on the site. So, an example of that, they had 1,800 employees and they were making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And they hired one person 5 days a week to review flagged videos that were flagged by users as terms of service violations, including child rape, trafficking, non consensual content. And they had a policy in place that the CEO in uncovered emails called very good and reasonable. And that policy was that they had to have 15 flags on a video before it would even be put in line for review. So a victim could actually flag their video 15 times, and it wouldn't even have been put in line to be looked at. And they had a backlog of 706,000 flagged videos. So that's one of probably hundreds of examples that we have of very intentional decisions made by the executives and owners to allow this content to be on the site. The other thing, real quick, is they had 10 moderators. Now, 10 moderators per shift. So they had 30 total. And not just working for Pornhub, because Pornhub's parent company owns most of the world's most popular porn sites and brands, including most of the world's most popular tube sites. So, like Pornhub, YouPorn, TubeBait, ExtremeTube, GayTube, so many. And they had 10 people who were watching 2,000 videos per shift with the sound off, just clicking through these videos. And I spoke to those moderators and they gave me the details on the way that they were literally guessing who was underage and who wasn't, who was being raped and what was rough sex. And they, it was basically a game of Russian roulette. Again, an intentional decision on the part of the owners.
Do the owners get off on child porn? That's kind of like a crude question, but I mean, at some point it has to be asked. Is this kind of like their thing or what?
I have no idea. I All I know is they admitted that they were avid users of the site. Like the CEO once said that he would go to Pornhub for his appetizer and then he would go to his paid sites for his main meal. So, I mean, he was very aware of what was on the site. The lawyer for many of the victims, he is representing hundreds of victims. And one of the things he said, based on their investigation that was done side by side with what we were doing, is that he said they know as much about what's on Pornhub as NASA knows about what's going on in the space capsule. That is, they know everything. Because at the end of the day, they are also a search engine optimization company. In order to drive traffic to that site, they know in great detail the tags, the titles, the comments, what's popular, what's not popular, what are the kinds of videos. They know even the different scenes. Like they would create thumbnails and they would say, at this point this happens and at this point this other sex act happens, and you can fast forward through the different kinds.
Oh, like chapters?
Yeah, like they would have a little like a indicator on the videos that would say what sex act is happening at what time. So if people wanted to just fast forward to their favorite thing, they could just go forward. So they knew in great detail what was on this site. I don't know, what they personally enjoyed or not, but I'll tell you that they enjoyed making money
Yeah.
from the content.
Tell me some of the examples of the categories that were searchable, because I think that kind of, I don't know, in a bad way, like it brings it home, that these were official playlists. So tell us what's out there, because that'll help the listener kind of get a grasp on how bad it is or was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, teen was one of the most popular search terms on the site tags and categories for years. And they would like proudly tell the public in their reports that that was the case until they got caught having actual teens, right? Because teen is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, right? But only
Yeah.
two of those are legal. And they had
Yeah.
so many underage teens. But they also allowed, like rape to be a term that was used in multiple different languages because this was being distributed and uploaded around the world. They actually had unconscious videos of girls who were literally unconscious in the videos to the point where they appear totally lifeless, and the abuser would actually open their eyelid and touch their eyeball to prove that they were unconscious in the video. And the title of the video itself on the site would say unconscious. Like one of them where this was happening, it was called Dead Pig, Eyes Half Opened After Being Drugged. That was the literal title of the video, and that's actually what was taking place in the video. And you would see the drug needles there, like that were used to attack the women in the videos, things like that. So there was a 12-year-old boy from Alabama, and he was drugged and he was overpowered and raped in 23 videos that were uploaded to Pornhub for profit. This was one of those 20% of videos that was being sold, where Pornhub was getting 35% of the sale of each video. And his rapist, Rocky Shea Franklin, was put in prison for 40 years for what he did. But think about that, like a 12-year-old boy, and in the titles of his videos, because we know this from the lawsuits, he's currently suing Pornhub. And it was like, young ass is best is like a phrase
Mm.
that was used in his video. Uncle secret, taking teen virginity, things like that, where it's so obvious from the titles to the video itself that this is a crime. And Pornhub, when they started to try to defend themselves, they would say, we review every video before it's put up on the site. Well, if that was the case, that means that they watched that video and the video of other, a 3-year-old on the site, right? Then they said, okay, this is good. We're going to not only allow this to be uploaded, but we're going to monetize it with ads and globally distribute it with a download button. So that just made their complicity even worse when they started to defend themselves by saying, we review every video. It was like way worse.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Do they report any of these crimes to authorities?
Well, they weren't for 13 years. And that's one of the things that we actually also uncovered through the course of the last 4 years was that they had gone 13 years without reporting a single instance of child sexual abuse they knew about to authorities. And in Canada, that's illegal. It's actually mandatory to report. It's against the law. It's a crime not to do that. But they had gone because they wanted to hide what was going on because it's bad for the brand. Imagine if what's happened so far is right, like they've lost their advertisers, they've lost
Mm.
their business partners, the credit card companies stopped doing business with them. They had to delete 91% of the site, like you said. They wanted to keep this from the public, they wanted to keep it from authorities. But to me, like the most horrific part of that was that imagine how many kids could have been saved if they had been reporting. So these children, some of them teens, tweens, had to go 13 years without anyone being able to come for them because Pornhub was keeping it a secret because it wasn't good for their brand.
Oh my god. If this was like a big building in the center of town, like especially our town, all of the redneck daddies with their big old shotguns would be, blazing their way through that door and shutting that place down. But there's some sort of social disconnect when we see something as virtual. And so I appreciate you being willing to share some of these details because I feel like it's the shake that we need to realize that this is real and it's not, I don't know, it's not made up, I
Yeah.
guess.
I guess sometimes people want to, it's just, I think human nature is you want to avoid pain, right? You want to avoid discomfort. Like that's just part of our human nature. And so our instinct is to want to just say, oh, it's probably not true or it's exaggerated or, all of these other things. And I understand that because it's not easy when you realize the truth. But that was why it was really important to me to go into the detail in the book, not to shock and horrify people just to be sensational or anything like that, but really to just drive home the truth, the reality of what was actually happening so that they could just get past that denial and then just to accept the truth that it really happened and that we have to stop it because it could be anybody's child. It could be even an adult, right? It could be them that has a non-consensual video uploaded forever more on the internet. So that was important to me.
For people who say, well, I don't participate in porn, or people who say, well, I enjoy porn, but I don't use Pornhub, or for those that may additionally say, and my kids, they know that they can talk to me. So they would never be in a situation where their video, they know better. I tell them not to send out, nude pictures of themselves to their boyfriends or their girlfriends. Why does this matter enough to talk about it for those folks?
Yeah, because I think it's probably naive for them to think that their child would be protected from this in a digital age that's dominated by social media, internet, these YouTubes of porn, for example, the ubiquity of sexting today for young people, even hacking. Like some of these victims are victims of hacking where they would have private collections of nude images that they would just share with their partner and then that would get hacked and uploaded online. Nobody's really immune from this. Like it or not, there are ways whether you are super careful with yourself and with your children, it could get to you and your children. I mean, another story, one of the victims that came forward, what happened to her was that she actually was in a chat room and because she was kind of not very comfortable at school, a little bit insecure. And so she started to make friends online. And this is like very normal, right? So,
Very.
like
Mhm.
what happens is predators pose as teens. And so they'll pretend that they're like a 14-year-old boy. And then they'll befriend a vulnerable 14-year-old girl who's online. They'll develop a friendship, it's grooming. Then they'll say, "Send me a nude image and video of yourself. I want to see how pretty you are." And they'll do it. And then they reveal what they're really after. They say, "Actually, I'm not who you thought I was, but I have your parents' contact information. I'm going to send these videos to your parents, to your classmates, to your teachers if you don't send me more or if you don't pay me X amount of money." And these children are so terrified that this will happen that sometimes they actually end up committing suicide at that moment. But sometimes they also just comply. And then they go down this very dark rabbit hole of abuse that is just so life destroying for them. So
Mm.
that's another way that it happens, where it starts off by just chatting online with a stranger.
The big question is why removal of Pornhub? Why not just better regulation?
So we need better regulation for sure. And that's like a huge part of this fight. So we want to see Pornhub and its executives held fully accountable, but we also want to see policy put in place to make sure this doesn't happen on other websites across the internet. So that looks like mandatory age and consent verification for every single person and every single user generated porn site on all sites that distribute user generated porn. The reason why we need to have severe consequences for Pornhub is because that's what justice looks like. Because we don't allow abusers and traffickers, if we are actually executing justice properly, to say, give them a slap on the wrist, let them move on, life, as usual, go on their merry way, continue profiting as they were, maybe call themselves a new name and go on. That's not, victims have told me they want to see justice fully served. In this case, that looks like shutting down Pornhub and holding its executives criminally accountable for what happened. That is going to be a deterrent to future abusers. Because really, at the end of the day, for these executives who run these companies and sites, it's a risk benefit calculation for them. And so they need to understand the risk of continued exploitation is greater than any benefit they get by maintaining the status quo. And what we're seeing is that because of the severe consequences that we are pushing for Pornhub to be held accountable, other porn websites who are seeing what's happening are already taking down proactively swaths of content from their sites that are unverified content. They're changing their upload policies. So there's this domino effect. When you really hold an abuser accountable, that creates a really important deterrent effect for future abusers, but also it's necessary for victims because they need closure. They need healing. They need us to recognize what happened to them was so horrible that it deserves a severe consequence. And I think that's why justice is not only a deterrent, but it's also healing for victims.
In your book, I read that Pornhub has, or at least they had at the time that you wrote the book, over 200 subsidiaries. If shutting down Pornhub is successful, would it include those subsidiaries?
Well, it wouldn't because they kind of have, for their tax purposes and for liability purposes, they have separated all these different websites into different companies that they run all over the world. So I think that probably Pornhub is its own case. And these other sites also are not just tube sites like the free tubes, these are also like paid sites and studio sites. So I don't imagine that this is going to shut down all of those sites, but it's going to hold one mega perpetrator accountable to the full extent of the law to have justice served for the victims who had their videos immortalized online by Pornhub. So if that could happen, I think it would be a huge deterrent to other abusers, even if it doesn't impact all of these sites
And
same
like you
way.
said, it could be a domino effect, both from market signals from the public not putting up with it, but also for other companies, other entities avoiding litigation, like you said, the cost risk analysis. At one point in the book, you ask the question, is organized crime behind this? And I don't know that I ever got the answer to that. What was your conclusion on that question?
So the victims who are suing Pornhub today, there's actually nearly 300 victims that are suing in 25 lawsuits in the US, Canada, and the UK. Some of those are class action lawsuits on behalf of tens of thousands of child victims. And dozens of these victims are using a law called RICO. RICO is a law that traditionally was used for the mafia. Today, it's being applied to other iterations of organized crime. And it is a law that is for organized crime, where a company is intentionally engaging in multiple forms of crime, and they are doing it in very particular and systematic ways. And so they're actually using the law that we have on the books for organized crime to go after Pornhub for that exact thing. And so, these are detailed 174-page complaints that systematically lay out the way that this company has operated as a criminal organization. And it has been called in these lawsuits a criminal enterprise.
That's another like, oh, okay, welcome to the present moment for me because I think of organized crime in a very old fashioned, very movie kind of a way where you're right. When you break it down to even the legal details and definitions, it is that we're looking at it. I have to ask you about this because in process of preparing for this conversation, I was asking people like, "Hey, when the New York Times published the Children of Pornhub article in December of 2020, did you hear about it?" And I asked people in real life, I asked folks on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook, and of the 15 or so folks that replied, only one of them even heard of it. And I was surprised actually that only 15 people even replied because, I'll ask some silly question on there sometimes, or actually one time it's not silly. I asked about bullying in school in
Mhm.
preparation for another interview I was doing. And I think I got over 40 comments. And
Mm.
so it's just, how is it that also in 2020, when the Super Bowl halftime show depicting kids behind bars, which was supposed to be a statement about immigration, my Facebook feed was ablaze with outrage. And of course, we've heard about, what's his name? Josh Duggar, of course, P. Diddy right now, Jared the Subway guy. Remember that? That stuff was all over my social media feeds when that happened. I had never heard of the New York Times article until your publicist reached out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes am shocked because from my perspective in my bubble, where I'm working on this every day, and I've seen like thousands of articles have been written about this. At one point when the lawsuits were filed in 2021, on CBS This Morning, victims were speaking out and they got 600 media follow-on articles after that. But even with all of that, I meet people every day who say, "I've never heard that this even happened." I'm so shocked because I had no clue that this was going on. And I mean, that's a great question as to how it has happened and that it has had media coverage, but not to the extent that some other things have. And, perhaps it's because it's not an individual, it's a corporation, it's a company, it's a website. And so, unless you really dig into the stories of the victims and understand that, I think that it's that kind of shrug that, yeah, maybe people aren't motivated to tell their friends about it. Whereas when you have an individual or a famous person who has engaged in this kind of conduct, where then it becomes more of a conversation piece where people are talking about it. Maybe people are more uncomfortable talking about pornography and porn sites and Pornhub, because if we look at the stats, I mean, probably a big majority of the world, or those who might be even listening to this, know what Pornhub is. Maybe have visited Pornhub intentionally by accident. And a lot of times people are just uncomfortable talking about it. So that might be another reason. But I think that's the importance of moments like this, where we're able to continue to spread the message, because people do need to know what's happening. And that's why I really hope that my book can reach people and fully educate them on what's happening and how we can stop it.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. When we see Jared, the Subway sandwich guy, coming out of his house with handcuffs on, we're like, well, that's the end of that. and we can
Mhm.
gossip about it with confidence.
Mhm.
But when we say, "Hey, did y'all hear that 91% of Pornhub's content ended up being child rape and otherwise just rape, and it had to get removed?" It could create some uncomfortable moments because, I mean, statistically, I think, I don't really know for a fact, but yeah, like you said, most people use porn or even use Pornhub. So I wonder if it almost butts heads with our idea of, like, what's the word? Modern, progressive sexual identity or sexual expression.
Well, people are afraid to talk about porn because they don't wanna seem like they're anti-porn or not sex positive, and they get a lot of backlash when you're seen that way today. And I guess that could also be a way that people are prevented from talking about it or feeling comfortable talking about it. Part of the strategy of Pornhub in this fight that I faced was really vicious attacks. When you raise your hand or you kind of get above water to say, hey, there's actual crime going on here. You need to be held accountable. This is what's actually going on your porn site. And their response is not to actually come back with facts because there's no actual legitimate defense because this is what has happened. So they come back with, you're just a religious, anti porn extremist who hates all sex and wants to destroy sex on the internet forever. And you're anti free speech, la, 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 all this nonsense. Right. And so I think that does happen to people when they talk about porn and what's happening on these sites. That's why for me, it's so important to be like, we're not talking about porn. We're talking about Pornhub, but Pornhub is masquerading as a porn site when it was really a crime scene. And that's why continuing to tell the truth. I love this quote. The truth is like a lion. Let it loose. It will defend itself. Getting out there, telling people the truth over and over and over again is what can defeat those narratives that are the false narratives that keep people quiet.
So, what's the update since all of this public attention and the success of your petition and all of the many, many articles that have been written? What has changed at Pornhub that wasn't the case before this all began?
Well, they had to take down that terrible download button. Like you said, they had to take down 91% of the site because it was unverified content infested with crime. They had to now, as of September 2024, finally start verifying the age and consent of those who are in the new videos uploaded to the site. However, they still have 5.2 million videos on the site, most of which are not, verified where the individuals in the videos have verified age and consent, only the uploader. So they had to start verifying the uploader so it's not an anonymous uploader as well. Hire more moderators, things that they should have been doing from day one. And I guess I would say they get no credit for this. They absolutely get zero credit because they did it under duress and by force. But I'm glad that it's being done because it's preventing, future victims. But we do need to get the last unverified content off the site still. And look, they've rebranded. The company was sold to a company called Ethical Capital Partners, who is now the new owner of Pornhub. And that's just a laughable name because the day they took ownership of the site, they were still profiting from unverified and illegal content on the site. But they're currently defending all of these lawsuits. They're in the legal battle with tens of thousands of child victims who are represented in class actions. Again, 300 victims have sued in individual lawsuits. They also were criminally charged by the US federal government for intentionally profiting from sex trafficking. That's another thing that recently happened. They've lost all mainstream advertisers. Not even KY Jelly will advertise on their site. Like Weed Maps will not advertise on
I mean,
Pornhub.
KY Jelly, I mean, that is a low bar. If KY Jelly will not advertise, I
And
mean,
neither will
you're
look, neither will Astroglide. Astroglide
oh,
like
that's
put
even
out a
worse.
statement. They're like, we want you to know we're not advertising on Pornhub anymore. Like
Oh
they had to
my
like come
goodness.
out publicly and say it because
Wow.
now it has this toxic reputation as it
Yeah.
should as a peddler of crime.
Okay, so you
And
said
yeah.
criminal case, so who's in jail?
Nobody, because they got a deferred prosecution agreement. So Pornhub was criminally charged by the Eastern District of New York federal government for intentionally profiting from the sex trafficking of nearly 100 women in California who were part of a girls do porn sex trafficking operation, where the people who ran that were a popular partner channel of Pornhub. They had this profit sharing relationship with Pornhub. Pornhub knew that this was happening and they kept profiting for years from these women's abuse. But what happened was they had to pay $1.8 million dollars, and then the government offered them a deferred prosecution, meaning they said, if you clean up your act and if you agree to have a babysitter over your site for 3 years, then we will not move forward with the full prosecution and we will defer your prosecution. So they entered into a deal with Pornhub. That's what happened with that.
Okay, that makes no
Mhm.
sense to me, and I know it doesn't to you, so forgive me while I go on this small rant. But again, if this was a creepy dude in the backwoods of Tennessee who was holding young girls hostage and little boys hostage and raping them, filming it, he would have the death penalty. I don't understand.
I don't either, but we're not giving up because it's not just the United States government. So we have states where they could be prosecuted by attorney generals. They can be prosecuted in every state in the United States. They also could be prosecuted in Canada where they have broken multiple laws in Canada, which some of them I've detailed on this podcast. So we're still going after, I'm getting the takedown book into the hands of government officials across Canada that could take action on this, to every attorney general in the United States. All 50 states got a copy of Takedown. Every member of Congress. We're distributing it to government leaders in the UK as well. So hopefully the truth will prevail in the end and justice will be served. And we're not giving up hope that can happen.
So many people nowadays really struggle with compassion fatigue, trying to stay update with the news. How do you prevent that with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's to stay close to those who are really harmed by this and to continue to make sure that it is raw and real and there's a human connection to those who are really being harmed by this. And also just to think about it, for people who, may I look into the eyes of my own children. I have a 4-year-old son and I have a 7-year-old daughter, and they I was well on this fight many years before I ever had kids, but now having my own kids just gives me a new level of motivation, because I just think about not only wanting to prevent this from happening to them, because there was a 14-year-old girl in Bakersfield, California. Her name is Serena, and she was, had a crush on a boy older than her. She was a straight A student. She had never kissed a boy before, and he convinced her to send some nude images and videos of herself to him, and she did because she wanted to impress him. Now, we can't blame her for that, no matter how diligent of a parent you are and how much you try to warn your kids about the dangers. But she did it. He shared it with classmates. It got uploaded to Pornhub again and again, millions of views. She got bullied at school. It sent her on a spiral of despair. She dropped out of school. She got addicted to drugs to numb the pain. She tried to kill herself multiple times. She ended up homeless, living out of a car. And that could be anybody's daughter. That could be my daughter one day. And so thinking about that just really motivates me. Thankfully, today, Serena, so to give you some hope, Serena has a place to live. She's pursuing a career that she cares about, and she is suing the hell out of Pornhub, its owners, its executives, Visa, and the hedge funds that funded Pornhub. So we're rooting for her to win. But that's a real story of a real victim that could be anybody's daughter.
For those that want to contribute to the continued progress of people who have done this being truly held accountable, not a slap on the hand by a judge, good
Mhm.
grief, because this sounds like it's just heating up. Like, this is not the end. This is just the beginning of the accountability. Obviously, reading your book is incredibly helpful. So glad to know that the proceeds go to the nonprofit, which also helps the victims. All of those links will be in the show notes. But what else can people do that will really help move the needle? Should that just be a social call to action, talking about it amongst their friends and their family members? Is signing the petition enough? Sharing on social media? What's the best way, from your point of view, to really help make change in this area?
I would say all of the above. So many people have no idea that this even happened, that this is even a problem on user generated porn sites. And so sharing it on social media, sharing it with your family, your friends, like that is the doorway to accountability and action and stopping this problem. Because if people don't know it's a problem, they can't do anything about it. To me, from what I've seen, the power of people individually coming together and doing things like signing a petition, I can directly connect thousands of media articles that have been written to that petition. People are signing it every day. You go to traffickinghubpetition.com and sign it and join, millions of people from all over the world. Sharing on your social media. I can't tell you how many times viral posts about this, about victim stories, where people are just shocked about it, but then they do something and they share it, and what that did, so that inspired victims to actually come forward who today are holding Pornhub accountable in court, inspired whistleblowers from the company to come forward. Very meaningful things that came out of people sharing a social post. So those are precious to me. And I've seen the way that they've been so powerful. And so I would say do that, read it, read the book, sign the petition, share on your social media, tell everybody you can about it. And if you want to take like an extra big step, go to your representative because they work for you and tell them that you want them to support age and consent verification for user generated porn because that would do a huge amount of good to stop it in the future.
Lila, it has been such an honor to share space with you over this hour. Thank you for the hard work that you're doing. Please reach out to me anytime that I can continue to support your efforts.
Thank you so much for having me. It was just an honor.